Welcome back, and we're done with most of our straight and curved letter forms. We like to do all these things first so that it's easier for us to figure out how to handle these characters that will have diagonals in them. So let's start with our K and our lowercase z.
For our lowercase k, we're going to pull in our lowercase h first. As you might imagine, we're going to use the same left-hand stem from that h. So starting with our serif version, or let's start with our sans serif version this time. That might be a little bit easier. We'll go over to that lowercase k and paste that stem. Then we're really quickly going to bring this over. I might bring in that lowercase h just for a width guide. And we're going to pull these points in to be, anywhere in here to start with. Then we can duplicate this, Command C, Command V to quick duplicate it, and flip it to get it going upright like that. For our lowercase k, the top part is thinner than the bottom. So while we might start with something like this, and this is a very Futura looking lowercase k, eventually this top part is going to be a little bit narrower that matches our thin strokes. Then, since these don't match anymore, what we'll try to do is get these points to come to a similar ending point, something like that. And there are some nice sans serif typefaces that have details like that. For ours, we're going to keep it overlapped. And if we want to be into that letter form at all, we can go ahead and we can attach it in there like that. Now the K is tricky because as soon as we take that letter form and we slant it, it gets thinner. So you can see in our preview here how skinny that leg looks compared to what it should be optically. So we'll thicken it up so it starts to match. Oftentimes some letter Ks will taper as they come into that stem and widen as they come down to that foot. So we might widen ours to help out with this really sharp angle that we're creating. The other thing that we want to pay attention to in our lowercase k is that all three of these white areas have a similar optic weight. So looking at this triangle here, that one there, and this one down here, the bottom one is much smaller, and this one's quite large. So we can bring that up a little bit, and we might even bring these points in. Again, thinking about how this H is working, we may want to thicken this stroke out a little bit, and I think I'm also going to add the taper to it. So I'm just going to move that point out, maybe this point in a little bit, so that I'm thinner down here where that joint meets, and wider out there where the point is, or the stroke, is all on its own trying to take up white space. Then looking at some more, I might bring it up a little bit. I might even think about bringing this point all the way in, and that'll give me this sort of ink trap, ink swell maybe, it's probably closer to an ink swell, that'll just soften that curve a little bit so it won't be so sharp and so rigid, and it might match some of the things I'm doing in my other serifs. Looking at that K is not too bad. It's going to be helpful for us to think about it in context, so I might spell some words. Just so I can start to see how it's working. Again, we'll need to fix that side bearing, and we'll bring this one down a little bit. Our K is a letter form that needs a lot of kerning with it too, so we could start with an even smaller side bearing just so that it feels like it has some more even space, and that was on the wrong letter form, so I'll go in and make sure I'm applying it to the right letter form. Looking at this K, I also might want it to be just a little bit thicker. That top stroke is still pretty thin, so I might thicken it out some more. We'll look at it. Let's get ourselves some E's in here so we can see what that other crossbar looks like. Maybe some S's. So we can start to look at the whole collection of the letter forms.
Mid-roll time. Be sure to like and subscribe to the video if you haven't already. It's going to be the best way to support these videos so I can keep putting them out and keep making them free to access. Alright, back.
Again, this is a typeface that's similar to something like Optima, so it'll be helpful to look at that letter form or that typeface and think about how it's working, what it's doing, the successes that it has. You'll notice here too that I have this bottom stem sticking out further than I have that one. That's just to help it stay balanced and give it some uprightness. If it's doing it too much, I could bring it in still, so it still overshoots that top one just a little bit, but it feels a little bit narrower, like he belongs a little bit more. If I wanted to bring the whole leg out, I could bring the whole leg out just a little bit. And if I wanted to make this lowercase k one with a loop at the top, I could do that, and that would be pretty complicated. Now that I'm pretty happy with the sans serif version, I'm going to move into the serif version, and I'm going to paste it right in here. I'll go back to my H, make sure I'm on that serif version, and grab those serifs. I want to make sure that we grab both of those serifs, and in my lowercase k, I'm going to make sure I'm on that serif layer, and I'll paste it there. I'll do the same thing we've done in the other upright serifed letter forms. I'm going to make sure this one is where it belongs. We'll bring that bit out. Then I'll bring this foot over, put him somewhere in the middle here. Bring a couple of these points up so that it's not sticking out of the bottom. And now a couple other tricky things. First, we'll duplicate this one to the top up here, and we will flip it. He will eventually go up there at that top. We'll bring some of these points down and see what it looks like. We'll probably have to move him left and right. And then we'll grab this one down here. We'll duplicate it again. I probably could have duplicated that one at the bottom. And now this one gets quite tricky because the serif isn't actually wide enough. Because we widened our leg of that lowercase k, we need to also widen our serif. So I'm going to decompose this so that it becomes a path I can edit. And I'm going to add a point. This will let me move the serif left and right rather than stretching it or scaling it. So I can bring this foot out here a little bit more. I'm going to hide this point just like we did in our up and down stem, so he ends somewhere in that. And now because it has serifs on it, it doesn't need as much of a flare. So we gave it a pretty big flare in our sans serif version. I don't think we need it quite as much here. I think we'll do something similar with our stem. We'll bring this in a little bit because it has some more weight to it. And then we'll make sure that this looks centered. So I'm just going to arrow key this over a little bit, make sure it's working pretty well. And just like that, we have a pretty good start at our lowercase k. From here, we'll start to get into our lowercase z. So we'll go back to our font. I'm going to open our lowercase z and a lowercase s. First, in our lowercase z, I'm going to add a component, and I'm going to bring back in our measuring stick. Now, I didn't add it to that serif layer, so I did add it to the sans serif layer. And this is just going to give me a measure to work with how thick we want this line to be. Remember, we were using this at the beginning, and now that we've made it all the way back down to z, we're going to start using it again, because there's not really many letter forms that use just this straight edge. That's all I need that measure for, is that horizontal line. I'll go and I'll grab it and I'll duplicate it from my baseline. And then I'm going to add a component, which is going to be that S. And I'm going to flip him so I have an idea of what's going to happen there. I'll make sure that my horizontal strokes are about as wide as they need to be. And in the sans serif version, I don't need to worry about my serifs just yet. So I'll add those there. We can delete that. And I'm going to have my anchors end at those points there, so it'll have a little square end to it. I'm going to start by bringing those in. We'll get these points to end right on that line. We can end right on that point. And we'll quick fix this path so that it's doing what we need it to do. And we can start to look at it in that sans serif version. We'll make sure that we have our sans serif layer selected. And we can start to look at it like this. I might even go back to this version where we start to type a lot of things, and we can start to type in some Z's as well. Looks like I'm not on my sans serif layer because I haven't drawn that one yet, so I'll make sure that I get back to it, and we can see what it starts to look like. Now our Z might be just a little bit narrow, so in our one that we're working on, I'm going to go back and add a component. I'm going to add my lowercase n, and I'm going to think about widening this out just a little bit. Again, there's a reason that we started with this lowercase n. It's because it gives us so much guidance in how wide characters should be, how the curve should work, and all those sorts of things. I'm going to make sure that it's actually touching the baseline and that X height, and that looks better proportioned as a Z. So we'll go back in here, look at it again. We'll get these to be something that we've set time and time again now with those side bearings. Maybe we'll type some more letters out of it. And for a sans serif Z in the typeface we're drawing, that's not too bad. Then, back in our editing one, I'm going to go ahead and duplicate what's happening with this Z in our sans serif version and paste it onto our serif layer. I'm going to add a component, and now I'm going to bring that S back in. In this iteration, the serifs come in, which is what I'm going to duplicate for this lowercase z. I'm going to flip it right away, and these serifs are actually going to extend above that X height, which is just fine. With my pen tool, I'm just going to quickly match what this serif is doing. We include that little cup, which was really nice. It comes and it matches somewhere like this. I just want to match the tonality of that serif so it feels like it belongs to the collection. I'll go ahead and I'll do the same with the bottom one. I'll just get him in the ballpark here. We'll draw all these points. Maybe somewhere in there. We'll make sure they're where we want them to be by matching this serif. And then we can delete our S. With those in place, all we have to do is move them around and get them to work on this lowercase z where it needs to. This little dimple here probably needs to come up a little bit. And yes, the lowercase z has these crazy massive serifs. If I want to extend higher, I can do that as well. We can pull up this serif so he sits a little bit higher, a little bit over that ascender line or that overshoot. And I might pull up the serif a little bit so that it ends in there, and I'll just widen it at that bottom. Then I can do the same thing with this bottom one. I'll bring him over. We'll start to adjust him so he belongs to this Z. Move some of this dent down and thicken him up at the bottom there. And then I'm going to go into my paths and I'm going to correct those path directions. With those serifs in there, now we just want to make sure that it's still upright and balanced. In our sans serif version, we might have to go back and edit this too, but it feels like this bottom half is too far to the right, so we'll adjust it so that that serif ends up actually inside of this point, and this one ends up pretty close. Again, we're sort of building a almost pyramid, a little bit like a trapezoid, so that it feels like it has an up and a down, and that you couldn't actually flip it. Back in our sans serif, we might do something similar. We'll just move this in a little bit so it feels like an hourglass or something that's upright. We'll keep working with this. I'm holding space and tapping those arrow keys so I can see what's happening. And these two letter forms together are going to help me sort out how this is working. Then back in the thing that I've started to type on, you can see how these Z's are going to work. Now looking at this, I might want to pull in the serifs of the S even more. Pull in some of that curve to give my serifs a little bit of weight. Right now it feels like they're little hash marks on the end of this really thin stroke, and that serif Z might need a little bit of work. I'll quickly go through that. So in my lowercase s, I'll grab all these points that I'll need. Command C to copy it, Command V to paste it. I'll give it a quick flip, and eventually it'll live right there. So we've already sort of sorted this out because of our lowercase s. Then I'll pull these up so they'll end up flat. I'll bring this one down so he's also flat. I'll delete my static serif that I don't need, and Command X to cut that point there, or that line there, to get rid of it. Then when I move this straight stem over, he'll attach, and now I have a serif with a little bit of curve on it. I could compromise and say, what happens if this one ends up being straight versus curved? Right now, maybe he's come out a little too thick. I'm not sure. We can go back into our typed version and see what that's looking like. Right now, he's not too bad. We might need to angle him out even a little bit. But we're going to trust the process, and we'll bring in these serifs as well. So paste him, give him a quick flip, setting him up where our other serif is. Delete that other serif. We'll bring these points down so it's in line with our stroke there, and look at how well measured that is. We'll cut out this bit here so that when we match it, he'll attach and he'll attach. And just like that, we have a Z with the round serifs that match that S. And even looking at the two here, that feels much more natural to what this letter form needs to be. I can get rid of some of these points that I don't need, like that point. I don't need this handle here. I'm still going to keep this, and we'll stretch this out so that curve is nice. I'm going to tighten this curve up a little bit so it doesn't have so much weight on it. I'll do the same thing down here. I don't need this handle or this point down here, but I do need that one to stay nice and straight for me. I think I already adjusted that one, so we'll just bring this guy in a little bit to tighten him up. And now we have a Z that feels like he belongs to that S. When we go back to our characters out here, it looks like he also belongs to these letter forms. Once I fix that side bearing, we'll look at it and say, does that Z belong? Does the K belong? How does he look compared to other letter forms? And does it feel like it's part of a collection? When the answer is yes, let's move on and wrap up this typeface.
I hope you've enjoyed that video. As always, if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. That's the best way to support what's going on. Again, you can like the video if you loved it. Give it a thumbs down, honestly, if it was terrible. And maybe I'll make another one, maybe I won't. If I learn something new, I'll make a new one.